recycling company through and through. So I will try my best to answer questions around sort of CO2 and anything to do with sort of emissions and all that kind of stuff. But I'm not in no way means the total expert. So please do bear with me. If there's anything that's sort of more challenging I can't answer, I will definitely come back to you and sort of like we can talk about it afterwards. So to give you, obviously, thanks for the event tonight. I can't believe how many people have turned up. It's actually really heartwarming for me to see how many people have turned up today, just because about 2 years ago when I started at First Mile, we tried to do a similar event, just up the road in Colmore, and we had about 4 attendees, which were mainly sort of businesses, and unfortunately at the time, whether it's to do with how bad I am at publicity or it's something to do with the fact that at the time it wasn't precedence to talk about sustainability and recycling.
I should have given us a call, really. I mean, we managed to fill a room all right.
Yeah, I know. I should have got your number earlier. But
yeah.
So First Mile is a recycling company. We are waste collectors, a dirtier word to use, but our mission has always been to recycle everything.
Yeah.
So we kind of look at waste as a resource instead of something just to throw out and then take away.
Yeah.
Our aim is to really understand actually, what are the barriers for people to recycle more, and then try and find a solution for businesses to recycle easier. So it's funny because the company's changed so much literally in the past sort of 2 years. One, from a growth perspective, so we've pretty much quadrupled in size over the past 3 years, and without sort of like boasting about numbers, but we're close to turning over 36 million this year, which is obviously huge from when we started. And we literally started with a man in a van, and our CEO, who's based down in London, had come from sort of a recycling background and was a doctor in sort of a similar field, and noticed that businesses in particular were really poorly serviced, not on a perspective of somebody collecting the waste, but actually being given the option to choose something else, something that might be a bit greener. And this was going back 14 years ago when waste was pretty much all the time buried in the ground or ended up in the sea or something like that. So yeah, lots of changes since then.
Okay, just by show of hands, who's actually heard of First Mile in this room? This doesn't work for radio, but nevertheless, okay, we're talking sort of like 40% of the room here. Maybe like myself now, I hadn't heard of First Mile until I went to, where are Plant and Pulse? Put your hands up. Plant and Pulse, plant-based restaurant, literally just based about 200 yards from here. Best lunch you're going to have in the city, and it's a shameless plug, but it is damn good. Now I went in to go and visit those guys because I was literally walking through and I ummed and ahed about it, and I went, do you know what, somewhere new, because I was literally coming here, sorry Chrissy, I didn't come for lunch here. I went in and I was like, I'm going to find out about this. And Rob, who runs Plant and Pulse, he was telling me about all their missions for sustainability, and he went into exquisite detail, and that's when your name popped up.
Yeah.
Now, the loose understanding, of course, that we have of First Mile, or my understanding of First Mile, is we're not sending anything to landfill. So talk me through the basic process of First Mile.
Yeah, so I mean, it's sort of like a key customer from Plant and Pulse, for example. A business that wants to do more in terms of their waste, and First Mile would sort of come in and obviously offer a service in terms of the overall waste management. So one of the caveats is that most people are used to general waste as a service to be disposed of, as we all are at home. And then also quite often is something like mixed recycling, but I'll sort of go into more detail probably about that later and my problems with that. But we try to really look at sort of the materials that leaving a business, and then find a solution for the materials that is more sort of stream specific, so that we can actually guarantee it's recycled. Our sort of zero to landfill is just, we've been doing it pretty much since we started, and that is just sort of our dedication to making sure that it's used for something else. But by and large, our main goal is to recycle everything. So we don't, in an ideal world, we don't want to send anything to incineration. We don't want any general waste at all. But in an ideal world, that doesn't exist yet.
Yes.
So our sort of main mission with our businesses is to make them more sustainable by giving them the right services, a reliable service in terms of actually just collecting it, and making sure internally they're educated to understand how those services actually work, and then long term is to see what is that impact that business has on the rest of the environment, locally and sort of globally. So we do things sort of along the lines of recycling reports, so business understands what their CO2 emissions are. So if you use this for paper recycling, for example, we can tell you how many trees you've saved, and we can only go into lots of different levels of data depending on sort of how interested or invested they are.
That's interesting.
We certainly don't have perfect customers, that's important to say. And we certainly...
Well, of course, except for Planet Pulse. We've got to
Except
make
for
that very
Planet
clear, yeah.
Yeah.
And anybody else in the room as well that uses them, of course, yeah.
And it's funny because obviously, you know, we also sort of take into consideration that sort of circular economy mission of we're almost probably going to put ourselves out of business one day because we want people to just reduce and reuse materials before it gets... We should be the last resort for most businesses. By and large, any kind of like consultation or figuring out actually waste output should be considered following the waste hierarchy of reducing and reusing in the first place, so that when you come to us, you've got hardly anything to get rid of, or if you've got something to get rid of, it's easy to recycle and a simple way of doing it. But yeah, it's been quite an interesting journey over the past 2 years.
Well, so how long have you been with First Mile?
So I've now been here since April 2017, so 2 years and a bit.
Yeah.
And I sort of started the business development side of Birmingham. So the London business has been going on for nearly 14 years, which is we service about 30,000 customers, and we've got some national accounts with people. But the Birmingham was sort of the next step in creating like a Midlands hub where we could offer out the same service as we do in London. And it was literally sort of a sales perspective, so I don't want to give too much of a sales pitch away, but I actually come from a hospitality background originally.
Yeah.
Left uni to be a teacher, ended up in a restaurant, as most teachers probably do sometimes. And then actually it was a passion because when I could see the profit and loss that was coming out of the restaurant, you could see that one of the biggest losses was in waste. And actually when you... I mean, I can blame myself, but the way that it was dealt with in-house was so poor. I mean, even when you think of things like mixed recycling, which we'll talk about, people didn't really know what they were doing. Yeah. So we were contaminating all the time, so it was additional cost, and then it was just an extra cost to the business. So then I'd start looking at sort of more exciting projects that might allow me to sort of like pursue that, and then something came up, looked into the company, and it was just a win-win for me. And we started in my car, man in a van, and then now we moved into a safe store, and then we've literally November moved into a larger facility in Albury, which gives us access to segregate more and make more use of the waste that we collect. So
I mean, if you do look at obviously First Mile's growth the last 14 years, it's impressive, and it is also addressing a very real need.
Yeah.
But it's of course not getting it absolutely spot on.
No.
For those of you that might have Googled First Mile and some of the implications, particularly with their London business, there's a place called the Belvedere Incinerator, which is set up next to a nature reserve. And there is accusations and investigations currently into potentially some chemicals going where they shouldn't be. Now, First Mile, obviously, you are not the owners of said incinerator. Yeah. The principle being that stuff that you can't send to landfill then gets at least burned to create energy, and I think it's quarries that actually own that incinerator. Yeah. This is something that's obviously not great from a sustainability point of view. I imagine most people here, whilst also being believers in sustainability, are also going to at least be a little bit of an eco-warrior and don't like the idea of birds getting sick from the water that they drink. What do you think the problem is here?
I mean, if you look at sort of the output of... So when we talk about incineration and landfill, we talk about sort of residual waste that can't be recycled most of the time, or stuff that people have got wrong. A lot of it is recyclable, just not in the right bag or the right bin at the right time. When we come to sort of incineration plants, so the one particularly in London, for example, I mean, where we're kind of in a good position is that we kind of see ourselves more of a logistics. So hence the name First Mile. It's the journey from the producer to the next best processor. So we try to cut out the use of any chance of contamination. So MRF, if nobody's aware, is like a material recovery facility. Reduce our usage on those and send to people who can directly deal with it and turn it into something, rather than rely on somebody trying to separate it where mistakes are commonly made. In particular with the incineration plant down in London, I mean, as you say, it's not something that's totally within our control, but in terms of the environmental benefits compared to landfill is significantly better. And we sort of commissioned our own report actually last year, which was around actually the changes in recycling. People now recycle more, but we're worse at it. So because everybody's so conscious, we put everything into our mixed recycling bin, hoping that it's going to be recycled. But actually there's a lot of materials that we do dispose of at home that can't go into that, and they won't be separated in that way. So when you've got general waste, you go through, instead of going to landfill, for example, the carbon emissions that are emitted via incineration instead of landfill is significantly lower, and that's mainly down to the fact that by using an incineration plant, you don't use fossil fuels instead. Obviously, any effects sort of nature reserves and stuff like that is something that should definitely be sort of considered. It's not something I could really sort of touch base on as somebody who doesn't sort of decide that.
Yeah, no, of course.
But it's something that we'd be definitely passionate about. We get very much involved with different charities, and last year we supported the Rewild in Britain campaign about sort of like trying to get more wild nature reserves, so something maybe that offsets that, but in no way means we've got any sort of direct link or tried to have any sort of like negative impact on what we're doing.
I mean, of course, the solution there is you're going to just reduce the amount that you're sending to the incinerator to begin with. I mean, those are your last resort, as it were.
Yeah, exactly.
So talk me through then, what are the kind of initiatives, what are the kind of things that businesses or individuals could be doing then to try and reduce the amount that is getting chucked into the fires?
Okay, fine. I think it's probably best if I split it up via sort of being at home and probably being at work. So it's always, I don't know, by show of hands, who's in Birmingham City Council District?
I'm hoping it's going to be most people.
Anybody outside of Birmingham? Okay, so this is where actually the complexity comes into the national way that councils are working. So Birmingham Council and lots of other councils all have their own arrangements and their own sites that they use and whatever else. So it makes actually trying to make the message clear in terms of what can and can't be recycled very difficult, because it's different depending on where you are, which is where confusion comes for most people. But the best resort in terms of trying to recycle at home is actually just to check that book that comes through in the new year in terms of what can go and be recycled, and also ask the council about what's there. And anything that isn't recyclable, don't make the mistake of assuming it can go in the recycle bin. Put it into the general waste, and that's mainly because if you do put it into mixed recycling, there's a chance you'll contaminate the entire mixed recycling load, which obviously again has an even bigger impact. I mean, some of the ones that always shock people is around the types of plastics that's kind of disposed of. So black plastic, for example, can't go into mixed recycling, but a clear plastic could.
Go on, tell me why.
So the scientific thing is that when it goes to a plastic processor, they use infrared lasers to determine what type of plastic it is. But black plastic reflects the infrared laser. So
it doesn't see it.
No, so it essentially gets mixed in with the rest of the general waste and spat out that end. So
that's interesting. So that then is something that we'd look at the people obviously producing the packaging first and foremost.
And the packaging one. I mean, I can't sort of, my opinion on sort of how packaging. The whole process needs to be simplified for waste processors. So one of the biggest problems that we've found since everybody's trying to be more green is everybody's trying to find a solution for something, but not really testing the market in terms of what that actually looks like further down the line. So what's the end destination for these things? And I won't name anybody in particular. No, I can't. I won't name because they are trying to change how that is at the moment, and they're working with us to do it. But it was a great idea to reduce the use of plastics, but the outcome was that the material that they produced instead can't easily be recycled via the routes that they thought could be, and there's only certain facilities that could process that material in a certain way to be recycled. So then it's that whole process of how do you close the loop and actually put it in the right thing. So that's where sort of we kind of differ with businesses, is we use very much a source segregated model, cans are cans, paper's paper, compostables are compostables, hint hint, and then and so on and so forth. So if we can collect it clean and we can collect it in decent quantities, it's valuable and we can process it that way. So
that's real nice. So I suppose on an individual level, everybody stop recycling at home. And chuck it all in the waste. No, of course that's not true. I mean, are there basic things that as individuals in this room we could be doing better when it comes to the recycling side of things at home? Yeah,
I mean, first and foremost, reduce reuse at home. So, challenge the supermarkets, give back any unnecessary packaging. If your avocado comes in a plastic tray and it's wrapped in an avocado bag, that'd be cool, in a plastic bag, give the plastic bag to the person behind the counter because they've got the money to process it the right way. Putting film plastic at home, much more likely it's not going to get recycled. So challenge those. Reduce anyway. It's things about like planning your shopping. That's something I did just out of like trying to save money. So if you don't do a weekly plan of your food, start doing it, because you'll see the amount of stuff you buy and crap you buy goes down, and also that incurs packaging that goes down, and it also means you get less food waste at the same time. In a recycling perspective, make sure you know exactly what can go in there. The labels that are obviously on a lot of materials at the minute don't follow those to a certain degree. And then the other ones is, if food waste is relatively low at home, so think about composting it. Totally doable. A lot of people are buying bean to cup machines at home for coffee. A great compostable material as well. It's good for potatoes if anybody's growing their own. And lots of different things like that. This isn't a sales pitch, however, we have just started our first sort of like B2C venture, which is a recycle box. And the idea is that you have this at home, you can fill it with one of the same material, whether it's coffee pods, if you're a naughty person and using those. You can put those in. It's a national framework in terms of logistics, and it comes back to us and we can recycle it that way. So it's specifically aimed at things that are difficult to recycle via normal domestic routes. So
nice.
Yeah.
That's a great sales pitch, I must say.
Thanks, yeah.
I suppose this is the point I want to kind of open it out to the floor. I mean, if you've got any specific recycling queries about, I suppose, your business per se, then come and speak to him at the end if you actually do want to buy what he's selling. But has anyone got anything that they want to add, anything that they're unclear on, anything that they think is worth just adding to the conversation? I'm going to get a room of silence. Yes?
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify. You said that the black plastic, gets chucked into general waste because of an infrared beam which is trying to detect whether the plastic is present or not?
So at this stage, so if you think about, I'll try and explain sort of the stage. So quite often with normal services, so like a general waste and a mixed recycling, it will go, plastic or mixed recycling will go via a MRF where they'll try and separate certain materials, normally at the highest value, so things like metals and cardboard and paper always gets pulled out. Plastics not so much at the moment because of what's happened in China, but if they do pull the plastic out, it will then go on to a plastics processing facility. This is where you find quite a lot of them being outside of the UK. There are UK based ones, but they'll pretty much all of them now use infrared technology to identify the different types of plastics that are being used or that are coming through the machines, and then it will set it off into the right path. Black plastic, because it reflects the infrared light, it essentially gets cast aside as general waste because there are other things that also pollute the plastic processing facilities, so it gets essentially cast aside with that instead of being set off in its own route at the moment. But yeah, black plastics, you should avoid it at any cost, essentially, is the best advice I can give.
Sorry, can I just go back and say what's happening in China? Because you kind of went like, and obviously, what's happening. What's happening in China?
So China actually did the right thing for them in terms of cleaning up the materials, because a lot of the stuff that had been sent was contaminated and not valuable. So obviously China want to repurpose it and reuse it for plastic, which actually is the long-term goal. Although we want to reduce the whole virgin material of plastic, we still need to keep it back in the system. But they were essentially being sent loads of rubbish that wasn't working and costing them money to dispose of. So they shut the borders, and what the negative impact that had was the economy for waste. So essentially all the prices to process material over in the UK just went through the roof, which then caused a lot of waste companies, including the councils, to just incinerate it or put it in landfill anyway, because it was more expensive to do that instead of process it via UK plants at some stages, which isn't great at all.
No, it's interesting to see there's also an economy.
Oh yeah,
recycling on its own right.
The industry itself is so controlled by commodity around materials. Like we have to review prices pretty much every 6 months around, not just for our customers, but also what costs we're going to incur. we're still very much, we would take the hit on a lot of costs because of trying to make sure it gets recycled. But the problem across the rest of the UK, it's not always the same. If, you know, a company can send one vehicle and collect everything in the same vehicle and then put it through a MRF and hope that something gets recycled, they're probably going to do that because the cost is lower. Otherwise, they might go out of business, or the councils might suffer and they'll run out of budget money. So, yeah, there's lots of issues in that respect. But at the same time, the way that we see of dealing with it is all about that source segregation. If you can put the responsibility to a certain degree on the producer to correctly segregate material and make sure it's clean and usable, then it's got a value to the commodity.
And when you say producer, that could be these people in the room.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay,
yeah,
awesome.
And obviously, you know, the before that, there's also conversations with people who actually produce the material. Of course, exactly. So there's an element of how do we incentivise the companies making things to do the right thing, and also how do we make sure the messaging is really clear for the public or the users to actually dispose of things in the correct way. So lots of challenges.
Did I have another question in the room as well? You got a follow-up as well? Go for it.
Yeah.
Sorry, I was just wondering about this idea about resources passport.
Oh yeah, okay. I'll do my best. I don't know loads. So this was essentially an idea brought in to try and track waste movement via the...
So this is a resources passport?
Yeah.
Okay.
And it was actually, and it started off, this kind of, the resource passport in theory has been going for a very long time in terms of actually just tracking waste, but it never tracked it all the way back from the people who built it in the first place. So the theory is trying to use obviously like 5G and new technology to actually start mapping out how materials are used so that you can actually keep things either, you know, in the UK or in a more circular economy process. Because if the material is clean enough at the end, then it theoretically, if it's processed, it can go straight back to the person who made it in the first place. But other than that, there's not much more I could probably add to that, if that's okay.
I'm just wondering if there's something that your company is like trying to encourage companies to put a resources passport so that, you know, if there's any rare materials, they can actually separate them at a later date and say, okay, this carcass contains of these things, and we could separate them and repurpose it.
We've been doing it more in a manual process at the minute. The kind of like the national framework for that stuff isn't really like ready to go yet in terms of trying to do it as across the board. But for example, we partnered with Hunter wellies, if anybody knows them. Obviously expensive wellies if you can get them, but that theory was that consumers would buy the wellies and then paid for by Hunter wellies. They at the end of their life, so once they're damaged or broken, and this could be any wellie actually, it can go into a recycle box, it can be picked up, it can be sent to us, and then we turn it into horse aggregate. So there's kind of that, again, sort of trying to map that route, and actually that whole product, as we might call it at the minute, is still very much in the development stage, and we're trying to partner up with big brands and other people. So the coffee pods I mentioned, so Tassimo, Illy sponsor the box and stuff like that. So it's working, but it's one of these conversations where trying to put that cost on, who do you put that cost on? At the end of the day, it all comes down to sort of price. Like, do you make the consumer pay for it, or does somehow that you've got to convince these big conglomerates to pay for it, which is a hard conversation to have.
Of course, yeah.
But hopefully, you know, with new legislation and the way that technology changes, that conversation is going to be much easier. So yeah, we'll see sort of how time goes, but hopefully that answered your question a bit.
No. I'd never heard of a resource passport before. It'll be blue at the end of the month, of course. Yes, we've got a question at the back of the room.
I'm just wondering, do you think it's a good idea to get the government to sort of impose higher taxations into producers that use plastics and, you know, actually packaging, and subsidise businesses that use paper as cardboard, you know, like stop them on a structural level, then we don't have to do anything like that.
So is this sort of taxation to like actual like the public, so like additional, or do you mean?
No, it's like tax the businesses and producers that use plastics.
It's definitely, I suppose, if there's any kind of tool to really incentivise a business to change, it's going to be tax. So I definitely think it's worth looking into. I mean, we incur obviously costs around sort of like the taxes we pay in terms of materials that we dispose of. So we feel the pressure. Obviously, if the business, as in the producer, feels the pressure, then yeah, definitely.
Well, I suppose to a greater lesser extent, the drive for sustainability, we've talked about the coffee pods here, it's almost an existential issue for the likes of Illy and Tassimo, that if they're not moving into that game, people are going to find sustainable alternatives. So if they're not finding a way of recycling those properly, they're going to be out of business soon enough anyway, because people are going to make a different choice.
Yeah, like a more ethical choice.
Yes, of course.
And people are moving to that. And actually, we've been sat at, there was a circular economy event not that long ago, and there was somebody in there who is sort of from the planning team at the council, and how procurement is changing to really acknowledge ethical decisions, less so money. I mean, we saw a tender not long ago, and 90% of it was actually about the ethical bits that you do, and the lower bit was about like the cost that incurs. So the attitudes are changing that way, and obviously as that changes, then the cost element becomes a lot smaller because it's standard, and that's sort of what we need to be aiming for is a standardisation of like how services should be run, so that we create a more circular economy, making sure that items are recycled more effectively. But yeah, it's a long way off, I think, which is a shame because it's an emergency at the moment. But yeah, I mean, that's kind of maybe advice wherever you work, put the pressure on, make sure that when they're thinking about any kind of procurement or any kind of deals, that they're thinking ethically about what's actually happening at the other end.
I see where you come from. I like to think that it's going to be a much faster route with people actually taking the right course. Are there any more questions before we conclude? Hello, yes.
I just wanted to hear your thoughts on biodegradable packaging, because obviously more and more people are moving to edgeware, cutlery, etc. And whilst I certainly feel better about myself when I buy it, what's the reality of it?
Biodegradable packaging.
How bad or how much better is it really? Because is it just in a landfill, or is it, because I've also heard for it to be able to degrade it needs to go through a very intense process.
So almost pulled me out on what I said earlier, but so biodegradable, compostable, definitely better than plastics, 100%, without a doubt.
They are two different things, though, are they not?
And
compostable.
And it's all to do with sort of like how they're processed at the other end. So in theory they kind of break down in the same way. So, but the myth behind it is that you just throw it on the floor and it's just going to like disappear and then nothing's going to happen. It's all great and hunky-dory. But actually, in theory, because of the quality makeup to make it a usable material, it's hard wearing. It's going to take hundreds of years to break down if you just throw it on the ground. Likewise, if you send it to landfill, it will release methane, as would any organic property. So our solution, we actually collect compostables and biodegradables as a separate stream, and we send it to one of a couple facilities in the UK who use a system called a conclave, I've got to get it right, which essentially is like a faster anaerobic digester, which is essentially a stomach. So it's a really hot, sweaty, and I'm going to use the word and nobody likes it, moist place. And it'll break down within sort of like, I can't remember the exact time, but it's a much quicker process, a commercially quicker process. So it's definitely a better alternative. The other side of it is as long as it's being used for consumables that are leaving a business, for example. If you're inside and it's something that crockery, for example, go to crockery, or go to glass, or go to something that can be used over and over and over and over again, because also then quite often a better quality plastic, even in some cases, which is much easier to recycle than a weak cup or something like that. So yeah.
Nice. I think we'll leave. Oh, we have got one more actually. Yes.
I was going to ask actually. I think you do, but I wanted to check. In terms of one of the things that's kind of blowing up in the commercial side in the beer and bars and cafes area is key kegs, which are famously dreadful for the environment. But am I right in thinking First Mile has looked into doing something about that?
So we actually partnered with Key Kegs about 6 months ago. So we collect them as if your normal key keg barrel collection would work. It's an ad hoc system, and we send it back to Key Kegs. So we essentially, there's obviously the compression valve, and they all get really small, and then we bail them, and then we send it in very large quantities back to be repurposed into Key Kegs again. So yeah, we've kind of closed that loop, which has been really good actually, and actually we've signed up quite a few bars on that service recently. I think I wouldn't say that they're really bad for the environment, because the other caveat to sort of like having the metal barrels, for example, is that the metal in normal kegs, once it's had its lifetime, which is a very long time, which is good, can never be reused. It's just way too degraded at that point. Whereas the key kegs, as it stands, can be repurposed a number of times, and also it's a lighter weight material, which means in air miles, for example, it's a lot lower in emissions, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
You know, the heavier the material, the more fuel it creates to move it, if you get that. So there's definitely benefits for and against, but if you have got key kegs, yeah, feel free to get in touch.
Nice. And thank goodness we found a sustainable solution to drinking beer.
I
That was everybody's worry.
I was supposed to have a dry January, but yeah.
But yeah, exactly. Thank you very much, Matthew. I really appreciate that. So guys, if you do have any other questions specific about what First Mile are doing, and maybe they'll be able to help your business or your home if you are interested in their new direct-to-consumer service, please ask Matt or his colleague Vinny, who's the very well-dressed chap down there with the suave with the black scarf. Thank you very much, Matt.
Great, thank you.
How you doing?
I'm alright, mate, thank you.
Good. Can you squeeze in just a little bit more?
Just to get a bit colder.
Yeah, thank you.
Is that alright?
That's perfect.
Don't knock any
Thank you very
tables
much.
over.
Just so we can pick you up. So, why are you here?
I don't know. Someone told me this was a good idea, and now I'm regretting it hugely.
So, the event Ecological, I suppose, to a greater or lesser extent, is the brainchild of Chris Rushbrooke. He runs an agency up in Lichfield called Northern Bear. Their goal is for the end of next year to be the most sustainable design and marketing agency in the UK, which is ambitious, to say the absolute least.
Yep.
So, how on earth have you arrived at that as a conclusion?
My background is marketing. I've worked in marketing all my life, degree in marketing, worked at several agencies in Birmingham, decided that I wanted to go out, do it for myself, have a go, learn how it works, wanted to do something for myself initially, and then over time, sustainability has come to the fore as an agenda to discuss personally at first. So we started off with an argument, which, as most good stories do, with my wife about whether something was recyclable or not. Pointless arguments. That's the way the world works. But we had this conversation and we were talking about it, and we just got a little bit more into it and started looking at our packaging, and the overall output of this conversation was we want to be better at what we do when it comes to sustainability, and in particular plastic, which was what we were discussing at the time. And when we kind of got into looking at plastics and recyclability, and I think Matt kind of touched on it, you think you're doing the right thing. Everyone has this idea that by putting the plastic in the green, blue, black, whatever colour bin you've got wherever you live, that's the right thing to do. And actually we thought, well, let's actually look at this and start checking and trying to be better. And by getting better, we recycled a hell of a lot less, because the ambiguity on packaging, on plastic, my knowledge just wasn't there. And we kind of settled into a little bit of research. My brain works like that. What is this? How do I make it better for us? Not as I'm not trying to solve the whole problem.
So sorry, tell us. You say you stepped into the world of research. What were you doing?
Just trying to find out about recycling symbols. Symbols was the first place I started because.
Well, that's where your argument started, right?
That's where the argument started. So I wanted to prove I was right.
Did you?
No, which is often the way. But we started looking into it, and the first thing we found out was the symbol that we recognise most as meaning something was recyclable didn't. So it's called a green dot, and it's a little swish of two arrows that roll around each other, and I just instantly thought that means it's recyclable. And it doesn't. It just means that company contributes to a recycling scheme somewhere. So straight away, everything we've put into recycling that has that symbol on is wrong. And that opened up a bit of a can of worms in terms of trying to understand recycling symbols, plastic types, packaging, and just trying to figure it all out. And it kind of led me to look at it from a business point of view. And I thought, well, how can I look at this from a business point of view? And we kind of came up with this idea of creating the Plastic Manifesto.
Yeah, so I was going to say, because I've got some stuff
Segued
here.
in nicely for you there.
Yeah, thank you very much.
You're
Yeah, no, that's really helpful. I mean, for those that haven't read it, I would strongly recommend
All of you. I
that
guarantee
you
no
do.
one's read it.
Essentially, it was a survey put out to a few hundred people, sort of just normal Joes, just correspondents came back to say what their experiences were when it came to recycling plastic, what they thought certain symbols meant, and it wasn't really trying to trick or catch anybody out. The whole purpose was just to understand what people's level of understanding was, which, let's face it, when it comes to solving a problem, is the first thing you always want to do is, what's our baseline and where do we start? And within it, there are some fantastic statistics. So, for example, every year about 8 million tonnes of plastic waste ends up in the oceans directly, which is the equivalent, as you've put here, 5 bin bags worth of rubbish going onto every single foot of coastline around the world.
It's a nice image.
Not the nicest image. No, I've been to Blackpool, and it's not great.
Probably not taking this to Blackpool then.
No, we're not taking this to Blackpool. No, it's fine. It's a black spot anyway. That's fine. But 85% of the respondents came back to say that they thought that green dot meant I can recycle this product.
Yeah, which essentially means 85% of everything that people throw away or recycle, shall I say, is done incorrectly or not necessarily correctly. So some of those, it does tend, there is a bit of a tendency that the companies that don't have a lot of recyclable packaging do the offsetting, but it doesn't really work in the same way as carbon technically works, that you could plant a tree to offset the amount of fuel you consume going on your holiday to Barbados or wherever you go. If you create plastic, it stays. That's the whole point of everything that's been discussed and written about it recently, is it doesn't disappear. So it just that was an issue, because everyone thinks that they're doing the right, the companies are doing the right thing. Well, they're recyclable, but they're not. And the whole, that then opens the door into the whole recycling symbology issue, in terms of there's about 27, and that's not counting the cute ones that Innocent do, or some of the different brands who have their own style. There are 27 standard symbols, which makes a mockery of using the word standard, and there's no uniformity, there's no cohesion, there's no clarity around what you do. So as a consumer, I mean, I went through 100 products that we had in our house. 60% of them had the recycling symbol on. The green dot. The green dot, sorry, the green dot.
Okay.
So 60% of them had the green dot on. And I think only about 15-20% actually clearly told you whether they were or were not recyclable.
Yeah.
So that's the base point. I can only recycle 15-20% of the stuff if all of those things are recyclable, and they aren't. So half of those probably were not recyclable.
So if we kind of zero down in, because I think we kind of touched upon this as well, chatting with Matt, there's an issue here for the consumer just not knowing. The fact that 85%, and I was probably sat with amongst those as well, thought that green dot meant that I could recycle something. Yep. In fact, I will admit to you now, I retook it just so I could get the right answer, which would have thrown everything off, actually.
It validates the whole
It does throw the whole thing off, but there we are, just shameless. But nevertheless, that's 85% of people saying that. Is it just simply better education? Is it just saying to people, no, this is what these symbols mean? Because I think the last time I had a conversation about recycling would have been year 1 or 2. We had this little robot come into school and it told us to reduce, reuse, recycle. Might be the only person who had that. I swear to God it's real.
That's why you get a private school. Didn't have that in Rotherham, I could guarantee you.
So is it on the consumer to just get better educated here?
There isn't really this is what we have to do. It's a combination of factors. Consumers have to try and do better. They have to try and make small steps. They have to try and improve their own sustainability, and they have to push up the stream, for want of a better analogy. And they need to make the councils, make the government, make the retailers, make the manufacturers address this issue. And they need to vote with their wallets. They need to vote with their feet. They need to switch where they can to alternative, more sustainable options, and I think one of the things we don't necessarily consider as part of this is it's a convenience thing. We as a species are or have become fairly lazy, and I'm definitely at the head of that queue. And we don't want to have to work hard. and if you have to work hard, you don't bother because it's too much of an effort. So the government, I don't want to just say it's the government's issue. Manufacturers and retailers should self-regulate. They need to start doing that. But the government need to push down some legislations or some guidance on what people need to do, and that comes in the form of education for consumers, but it also comes in the form of creating some sort of standardised recycling symbols that everyone then has to place on their packaging to give consumers, at the moment consumers don't know if they're making a good or bad choice.
Well, as I think we heard from Matt, the answer is most of the time, no, they're not. No,
and if you compare it to nutrition, so nutritional information, I don't know, 5-10 years ago maybe, there was a big conversation around obesity, heart disease, and the pressure that nutritional choices were making, putting on the NHS. And the whole reason nutritional information came on was to try and help people to make better choices. And I would argue that this is probably a bigger problem, maybe not on an individual basis or maybe a UK basis, but from a global point of view, this is a bigger problem. Yet there is nothing being done. There's no guidance, no standardisation, no regulation at all. People do whatever they fancy, essentially.
I mean, you're saying here that obviously we want consumers to vote with their wallets and vote with their feet.
Yeah.
In your experience, is the more sustainable solution the cheaper option?
No. Almost always it will be more expensive, but that's an economies of scale issue whereby there's a shed load of plastic made and not a great deal of, was it mushroom based, or vegware is a great case study. Yes, it's still not perfect, but it doesn't create new plastic, which is one of the key issues around the whole thing. It's about creating new plastic is the issue, and that's what I think needs to be addressed.
Is the first step then improving the recycling symbols, or are we still at a stage where people aren't necessarily aware of the scale of the problem?
I think the first step, if it was me, if I was Boris, if I was sitting in my number 10, not discussing the EU, it would be to try and almost re-centralise recycling. So at the moment, as Matt talked about, it's council by council, which means that if you live on the border of Tamworth and Burton, you have completely different recycling options, which shouldn't happen. We can't create an economy of scale by everyone being siloed and creating their own thing. There has to be a wider take and a higher level take on things. So that I would say, even if it means in the short term, we can recycle less. Standardising recycling then gives the manufacturers and retailers the ability to say yes or no, because at the moment it's check this, check it curbside, take it to the store, do this, do that. No one can do that. No one has the time to do that or make those decisions. So you need standardising at the top, so that we can then create a clearer system, a clearer way of labelling, which will then mean the end user, who is ultimately responsible for this, can make a better decision. They can recycle something and know it's going to a plant. And over time, we can then introduce, so we might start with PET 1, I don't know whether that's recyclable or not, but then you might roll it across the different types of plastic, and in it we can slowly create a better system. The issue is we don't have the luxury of a great deal of time. So Matt said it's not going to be a quick solution, but it kind of has to be. Somewhere there needs to be someone, some company, government, organisation, who creates something that helps to solve this problem.
Change starts with the individual, like in everything.
Yeah.
I just want to kind of pivot this now to a little bit more about, this is the first event that's you've essentially put together for Ecological.
Yeah.
Now, this is one man's way of going about it. What are you hoping to achieve with this?
I think, so the whole, to come back to your initial sort of question about becoming the most sustainable agency in the UK, we don't really have an idea of where we're going. We don't have an idea of what success actually is. We're just going through a process of trying to make better decisions as a business, encourage our those people who we can influence, which is probably mainly clients and suppliers, to improve their processes and to work on that better. And this is just another way of raising the profile. I mean, as you said, we didn't know if we'd be sitting here having a beer with the four of us, and you know, the camera guy thinking, why have I bothered schlepping all the way from South Birmingham? I don't know. But actually, there's 35, 40 people here, and it's 35, 40 people who are having a conversation or listening to a conversation or getting involved in the conversation about recycling in this particular instance. But sustainability is a much bigger thing. So from what we've looked at, I won't bore you with all the details, but we're kind of looking at our processes, looking at our suppliers, and we're looking at the people who work for us, which isn't a huge amount of people. There's only 4 of us. But you know, sustainability is not just recycling. It's not just eating a different way or, you know, reducing your meat intake. It's your whole life. Your whole life has to be sustainable. The business has to be sustainable. It has to make money. The people who work with us have to be sustainable, and their mental health has to be right. They have to be looked after. They have to be able to afford to pay their own bills. So there's a bigger issue around sustainability, and I think sometimes we get a little bit pigeonholed in the specifics of the physical things. Not to take in a different way of mental health and all that kind of things, but sustainability is an ethos. It's a way of thinking rather than.
It's to make sure that it can continue, of course. Yeah.
Yeah. So if it's not sustainable, it will end. That's what sustainability means, and that's as big as the world and as small as a business.
As small as you and your wife having an argument in the kitchen.
Exactly, which we do occasionally.
Yeah, of course. I mean, it could have been just 4 of us sat in a room,
Mm-hmm.
and instead it's about 30 very brilliant, very selfless people who've schlepped out in, as you put
40,
it.
not that I've counted
It's
everyone
40,
individually,
yeah.
yeah.
You could have schlepped out in probably some of the worst weather I've seen in
Yeah.
a while. What do you want them to get from something like Ecologicals? This is the first.
Yep.
Where does it go to next? What happens next with these people?
So this is about. So Mark, I kind of think that everyone has to take a first step. That's the first thing to do. So it could be as little as stopping eating chewing gum because it contains plastic and switching to mints. It could be as small as that. If everyone does that, it creates a bigger impact. So this is the first event. We don't know what it's going to become. I'd like people to get involved, to put their thoughts forward. I've spoken with Claire from BC already about potentially working with them to help them understand what people in this room could do. For a start, there are people in this room, First Mile, Platinum Pulse. I'm not sponsored by Platinum Pulse, just to be clear. But Bob started me on a journey to reduce my meat intake. I watched a documentary recommended and pretty much stopped me eating meat overnight. More from a health point of view than necessarily sustainability, but it's a nice byproduct of a personal choice. So everyone needs to just approach it in their own way and make their own choices about how they can make a difference, and some of it will be little things and some of it will be big things.
Of course.
So if everyone just takes away the thought to try and do something tomorrow that's just a little bit more sustainable, walk, don't get an Uber, get a glass milk delivered to your house, check your packaging properly, and if it doesn't say explicitly it's recyclable, put it in the bin. It's a bigger problem than yours, but you can only do what you do, and by contaminating plastic recycling, it's going to be worse than putting it in the bin, because we can't then necessarily recycle a whole other load of plastic that is recyclable because it's been contaminated.
I think it's fair to say, isn't it, then, that the act of the individual amounts to something quite significant when it's in that community. Is that something you want to create?
Yeah, I think so, yeah. I like how you've led me into that. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, definitely.
What I'd like to
you
do
could say no.
is create a community. But yeah, I think it is about community. I think it's about just getting a group of like-minded people together who can start to affect change. And that's, you can't look at it from a global perspective because the problem's too big, and we can't solve that ourselves sitting here. But you can make the changes yourselves. And as a community of connected people, which I suppose this is what it's all about, is you may meet people who can help and address the problems that you have, both personally and professionally. And I think it's important that it's not just about businesses. This is about consumers as well, and people and individuals. So I think that's.
I know I definitely led you there.
You
and
did.
just for the context, I suppose, of the room, I think the word of there was a conference I went to last year, and particularly I went to ones that are around social causes, climate action, addressing homelessness, and everyone was trying to come up with the best solution, but the word that was underlying in every single talk, every single Q&A session that I had, spoke about community, and it spoke about the power of community, and all that simply is a bunch of people with a shared idea, a shared goal, working together, because the exchange of ideas, the exchange of resources, the exchange of time actually amounts to something quite significant. You as an individual do something significant by working with somebody else towards the same end every single day.
And
Most of you doing your jobs.
that's the purpose of the, rather than saying free drink, let's get some ideas and some content, and then we can use that to promote it to this community and spread it wider, hopefully. So we're going to try and...
That's a good point, actually. Has everyone taken a form and given us their best and brightest ideas?
No one's going to admit to not.
If you haven't, please come and grab one before you go, because we'd really like to hear some of your thoughts and ideas. From my perspective, just trying to get this off the ground. You guys turning up has been a significant part of that, and we really do appreciate it. I think we'll open it up then to questions from the floor then for the man with the plastic manifesto. So, yes, please.
I think it's obviously very clear that individual input is really important, so it doesn't have to be big companies, but from a business perspective, what have you found to be the biggest challenges, and what advice would you give to other businesses that are looking to do the same?
I think...
That's a
Do you want
great
to
question.
Yeah, it is.
I always repeat it. Yeah,
I'll forget it if you
I was
don't.
going to say, so as an individual, you can do so much.
Yeah.
As a business, what are the challenges? What can you be doing to be more sustainable?
I think from a business point of view, it's you only control your little ecosphere, you only control your little bubble. So we're obviously trying to implement changes, but there's a cost implication to most of those changes. There's a logistics issue to those changes. There's a time, I don't know if that's the same as logistics, but there's a time issue as well, so making those things happen. So we I don't know if anyone heard of B Corp, show of hands? So 4 or 5 people. B Corp is essentially a certification that companies can undertake to almost say we are sustainable, and there are various different levels. You score a certain score in your B Corp. If you score a higher score, you're B Corp Premium, can't remember that, but we're looking into that, and it's kind of something that's for bigger organisations, I would have said. But if we want to be known as the most sustainable agency in the UK, we have to aim high. It's a high aim, and it's a high standard. But the reason I bring that up is actually just going through the assessment process of that, which is free. So anyone who's in a business, it takes maybe half an hour. Highlights the journey we've got to go on to try and get there. There's a whole load of administration, there's a whole load of policies that need to be written, there's a whole load of actual things we need to do and demonstrate, and also not just do, we have to be able to prove it. So doing that made me a little bit more scared of the job we've got, because as well as I've sort of looked at it from a process point of view, but actually for a business to be sustainable, it has to be within every single part of the business. And I suppose from a brand, we work in branding, it's the same thing. Sustainability has to be part of your core, so part of your core reason for being. So it has been job descriptions, it has been mission statements explicitly. So I think that was quite a good process to go through, and underlined the amount of work that's going to take over the
gap
next
between now and
11 and a half months. Although I've realised that we said by 2021, so is that December 21 or January?
No, it's by the end of the year.
Yeah, I'll decide that.
Any more questions, please? Yes, gentleman at the back.
So you're obviously doing a lot of work with looking at your processes and suppliers and that kind of thing. Are you doing any activities which directly relate to your output as a business, as a marketing business?
Yeah, so our suppliers we're reviewing. We've found a superb supplier called Ashley House Print, who are based down in Devon, and their whole ethos is around everything is as low effect on the environment as possible. So they don't use any paper other than recycled paper. They use vegetable-based inks. They have zero waste policy that they try and hold up, and they try and have processes through that. I don't know if you see, but there's a lady who's based in Lichfield as well, who I think Square Peg. So her niche is sustainable merchandise. So one of the other things, we've got pens. which I ordered 2 years ago maybe. They're not sustainable, they're not eco-friendly, but you don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. So we've still got legacy things in our office that aren't sustainable. And when we come around to needing more pens or books, books can be made from stone, they can be made from all sorts of plant-based things. There's all sorts of really interesting things that you can do. So we're reviewing that, and what we're trying to then do is pass that on to our clients as well. So we're now in the process of probably losing a lot of print work because we aren't using printers who don't adhere to these standards that we're trying to set for ourselves. So our print will be more expensive, which will mean an impact on the business from a profitability point of view. So when we print our own things, it'll be more expensive, but also we'll probably lose business from existing print. We obviously create a lot of collateral that then needs producing, but if we aren't competitive and it's not within that business's ethos to be sustainable, then we lose that business. So there's an impact beyond that, which we're going to just have to suck up and hope it works out right for us, I suppose.
No.
Does that answer the question?
Any more questions? Yes.
It's more of a question about sustainability as a whole rather than just plastic, moving from plastic to paper, because so the trends we're seeing now, let's try to use less plastic and go to something that's more paper-based, it's easier to recycle, more environmentally friendly, or going into bamboo.
Yeah.
There's a lot of the trend we see, but as a society in the world, we're consumers. We consume more and more and more. And
Yep.
it's only a matter of time that if you use less plastic and use more paper, well, next thing we have is even more deforestation problems. What are we going to do with bamboo? Okay, it grows very fast, but how much of our land do we need to change into bamboo plantation to satisfy the need that we have for bamboo?
Yeah.
Is there a study or an organization that's looking to see, well, what's the overall sustainability rather than one aspect of it? And when it comes to food, okay, it's water, it's land usage, it's CO2.
I don't think I'm not. Matt's more of an expert than me. I was a bit worried about coming on after him because he has a much better knowledge. I think the obvious answer is no, because there can't be, because Donald Trump isn't on board. So America isn't on board. So there isn't that would be the G8, G7, whatever they want to call themselves nowadays. That would be the starting point for that would be the organisation that addresses this globally, but they aren't. On the point of paper usage, there's a lot of paper out there. The bamboo does go quickly. I think it is a better material. I think like Matt said, it's using vegware is better than plastic. No doubt about that. But everyone, so I listened to quite an interesting podcast called Sustainababble, and they were talking about everyone's offsetting their carbon by planting trees. And it's like, well, if we're offsetting the airplane fuel, if we're offsetting meat production, if we're offsetting our own hive, if we're offsetting everything by building, how many trees are we actually planting? Is there the space? Because as far as I'm aware, we're losing forests, not gaining it, but everyone seems to be offsetting by planting trees. So it's quite an interesting point. Nobody is, and that's the problem. That's the main issue we've got, is that no organisation that has the power to do this is doing it, because they're led by interesting people with strange ideas and ideologies. We probably shouldn't go into that just now, but I think we have to address the immediate problem first as consumers. Cut out plastic because that's the current problem. There will always be another problem. You switch to not eating meat, you then got to make the right choices with that, because actually some of the stuff that's made to replace meat isn't that good. If you switch from plastic to paper, you're still consuming. As you say, we will always consume. So I think we have to change our consumption habits first, and then try to improve it. I think if you think about petrol cars, and when they were first introduced, the output of their gases and pollution versus where we are now, we're constantly starting journeys of finding new solutions and then improving them. So electric cars is probably the best example. Electric cars are superb. They actually cost more from a CO2 point of view to make, but their life cycle, they are much better than petrol cars. But that's now, and they're only 10, 15 years old maybe, or into, certainly in mainstream. What will that be in 50, 100 years when we've actually refined that? Will they exist? Will we be, running off maize cars, or what will it be? It'll be interesting to see where we are in 100 years, but I think it's important to look where we are and where we can go, rather than just worrying too much about that.
Technical director.
Do you want to jump
Tesla.
I was going to add, if you think some of the way the processes work at the minute, we're very much on a linear process in the way that we consume things. So the model the ideal model that we always want to work to is a circular economy, whereby, and this might completely change the game in the room, but plastic isn't bad. Yeah. So
It is bad, or is it bad?
it isn't bad.
All right.
So it's bad in terms
New
of
plastic is bad.
virgin
Yeah.
material that has
Anything
been
else
burned
plastic.
is bad, but it exists. So the idea of it being disposed of sort of disposed of is the enemy. What we need to do is find a way of looping it back in, and it's sort of away from that is obviously there's more and more amazing inventions coming out all the time. I mean, if somebody wants to look up, there's a company called Biome that are planning to build all the future houses of the UK out of mushrooms. So, because the construction is a massive issue in terms of the waste that they produce and what that causes. But if you search it and you look at what they're doing, it's a circular model, so that it can be grown, form boards and everything else, and then it can be processed back down again, feeds the stock of new fungi that grows. So there's loads and loads of stuff coming out all the time. But like I said, it's dealing with the issue now, which is obviously the climate emergency is we're all going to just burn alive at some point if we don't deal with the issue that's happening now.
No, people are burning alive now.
Yeah.
That's the problem.
Yeah. So, but
It's
yeah.
interesting. I'd like to see that the IP rights stay with the Smurfs for their fungus houses. We have another question, gentleman at the back.
I think, I totally agree with you when you said with individual choices, in terms of dealing with this sort of thing, which consumers have to make choices when they're purchasing things, which I totally agree with. But, I guess people come from different backgrounds economically as well, and, buying things from McDonald's or Primark is a lot cheaper than, buying sustainable things.
Yep.
So when it comes to, making an individual choice, I would rather go to Primark, where it costs to go, than buying from somewhere else, which would cost me quite a lot. So, in terms of trying to reach out to massive amounts of people that would afford it, what are you doing as a business? Are you trying to compete with your price level?
Yeah. I think with any purchasing decision, it's convenience, cost, and function. What do you need it to do? What can you afford? I can't remember the other one.
Convenience, how
Can I get it?
yeah.
Can I get hold of it? And I think everyone needs to just do what they can. Buying more sustainably generally, not always, is more expensive, but it doesn't have to be a purchase decision. It can be better recycling at home. It can be making the right choices with regards to transport. I think that the main thing is that people do something. No one's asking you to get into debt just to be sustainable. It's not worth it, because your time on Earth, will be ruined. Whatever time left we've got on Earth, you don't want it to be ruined by being, I bought that really nice sustainable thing, but I couldn't afford it. So people have to live, and I think convenience versus quality versus price versus quality is one of the key things. I mean, we've got 2 kids, and I can guarantee we are one of the least sustainable couples in the country, because kids make shit, man. Literally and figuratively. They wipes, nappies, toys, what they consume, what they want, they don't care. They don't care. So and the options aren't there. We buy compostable, biodegradable, should I say, wipes. We do what we can, but kids create a lot of mess, and it's the convenience versus cost. We can't afford to do what we would like to do necessarily, but we do what we can, where we can, and hopefully our kids will appreciate that when they've still got a world in 20 odd years.
Nice. I just want to end tonight's discussion then to say, before I say thank you to you, Matt.
You don't need to say thank you.
No, I will in a minute. This has been a very interesting experiment, and I think sustainability and sustainable solutions are always going to be about trying something, seeing how it goes, and seeing whether we can actually make something happen. I'm really interested to see what actually might come of this. We are going to be doing another event, and it's going to be in 6 weeks' time. We're going to try and keep that relatively regular, so the date for your diaries will be the 4th of March, and we have Sisters Against Plastic coming to do a talk. They are a local couple of sisters who went on a 12-month campaign to cut down their plastic waste, and they basically documented it. It's a fascinating journey that they went on, and it's absolutely dramatic in terms of the transformation they made in their own personal lives. So it's definitely worth coming along too.
They're also not here tonight because they're talking to the Environment Agency. They didn't speak for the talk for the Environment Agency, so they're sort of like headliners. Obviously, Matt was the headliner tonight, but they'll be the headliners for the event. But they know what they're talking about, and I've had a couple of interesting conversations with them, and they're currently trying to figure out how they use their knowledge and get it out there. So they're talking about writing books. They're talking about they're currently involved in zero plastic food supplies and giving people a place where they can go and buy things without plastic, which is one of the key issues as well for them. So they'll be great. They'll be really interested.
They don't need to come now. We've told them exactly what they're doing. That's fine.
Guarantee they'll be more interested than me.
I just want to say thank you to Chris, first and foremost. Really appreciate you coming along. And also thank you to absolutely everybody here. Just to end, now if you do get a chance to go and read the Plastic Manifesto, Chris just ends it on this line. I think it is pertinent. It's a quote from obviously Saint David Attenborough, which is, never before have we been so aware of what we're doing to our planet, and never before have we had such power to do something about it. Today in this room, you've got people that also believe in the same thing that you do, and there are countless other people who also believe in the same things. If you are doing something good and it is driving towards sustainability, keep it up. And any ideas, any feedback, anything that we can be doing better as well, please let us know, because we want to keep this going. We want to try and do some good to the planet. So thank you so much, and thank you, Chris, and have a wonderful evening, guys. Thank you.